Hello and welcome to another Brawl video. This week my supporters on Patreon voted for Moseo, Vayne's new Dean, in this mono-black sacrifice and life gain deck. Moseo, a 3-mana 2/1 flyer that spawns one of these new pest tokens, a 1/1 that gains a life when it attacks. And then at the beginning of our end step, if we've gained life, we get to return a creature from our graveyard back to the battlefield if its mana value is less than or equal to the amount of life we've gained. So Moseo rewards us for playing lots of cheaper creatures that we can easily sacrifice or mill into the graveyard, and then by gaining 1 or 2 life we can already get a bit of value, maybe even the same turn we play our commander, and then as the game progresses we can maybe even get some larger creatures back if we can set up some more life gain synergies. So then if we take a look at our deck breakdown, I've split it up into a few different categories. Starting with mana acceleration, we've got some ritual effects that can come in handy to set up more explosive starts, as well as some mana artifacts. Then we've got plenty of interaction. This stretches all the way from discard spells to spot removal to board wipes as well, and especially creatures that can sacrifice something when they enter the battlefield are especially powerful with Moseo, since we can potentially keep looping them back out of the graveyard. So cards like Plague Crafter and especially the Accursed Marauder are among some of the better removal options in this archetype. Then we move on to our card advantage sources. These also include many ways for us to sacrifice our creatures at instant speed and draw, so we can set them up for Moseo. And then we've got some more powerful card draw engines as well that can maybe exchange our life total with additional cards, which also works perfectly in a deck that's capable of gaining a lot of life. And then we get to our other life gain sources, which can help enable Moseo. These include the typical Blood Artist effects that can drain the opponent for 1 and gain a life whenever a creature dies, as well as some bigger lifelink creatures, such as the Barrogoyf, which can also grow with cards in graveyard. And then of course we've got some of the classics like Ayara, which is also especially synergistic with Moseo, since it'll trigger twice, once of Moseo, once of the token. And then other staples like the Grey Merchant, which can also reward us for having a lot of devotion to black. And then our next category is the sacrifice fodder, if you will. Lots of cheap creatures that maybe leave an extra body behind that we can then also maybe sacrifice or chum block with. And then also more ways to fill the graveyard in the first place with cards like Stitcher Supplier, Mire Triton, and the reinforcements. So those are all excellent to set up our graveyard, and some of these also gain life in the process, so they can enable Moseo in one fell swoop. And then the miscellaneous section has Entomb, Reanimate, and Vampiric Tutor, all pretty busted cards. Entomb can maybe find the perfect creature to get back with Moseo. Reanimate can get back whatever we want from our graveyard if we happen to mill it, including our commander if we don't want to pay the commander tax. And then Vampiric Tutor can also maybe find the right card at the right time. And then our mana base is mostly swamps, since we do have some payoffs for including lots of swamps in our mana base. Removal spells like the 2-mana Consuming Corruption wants us to have lots of swamps in play, and then Dread Presence also rewards us for playing a swamp, as we'll get to either draw a card or deal 2 damage. But I did make room for a few utility lanes, including the new Library of Alexandria, which has been recently introduced on Arena, so that can also sometimes win a game for free if it's in your opening hand, as well as some life gain lands that can gain 2 when they enter to assist Moseo in getting back a creature from the graveyard, maybe on the same turn where we played our commander. So that's our deck in a nutshell. Now for the deep dive, starting with our mana acceleration, we get to play with Culling the Weak, which is perfect in a deck with lots of cheap sacrifice fodder, so we can easily sacrifice a creature to make 4 mana. And then Dark Ritual doesn't need an introduction, even though we can play a Moseo on turn 1 with it. Usually there's better plays we can make, like maybe establish one of our many card draw engines. Then we've got the Terminus, which is a better Arcane Signet in this deck, since it's indestructible and can maybe harness it later, but Arcane Signet still makes the cut. And then Bontu's Monument is perfect here, discounting our black creatures by 1, in addition to draining the opponent for 1 whenever we cast a creature spell, so that can also help enable Moseo and some of our other life gain synergies. Then we move on to our interaction with lots of cheap spot removal, including Fatal Push. Requiting Hex can also blight to gain life, so has additional synergy. And then at 2 mana, we've got Bitter Triumph, which can also help answer Planeswalkers, similar to Sheoldred's Edict. Consuming Corruption, our payoff for having lots of swamps, can also gain a lot of life to set up Moseo. And then a Dismember we can also cast for 1 mana and some life if we immediately want to take out a problematic creature. Snuff Out can also be cast for free if we control a swamp, if it's a non-black creature that is, at the cost of 4 life. And then we've got some other answers here in the form of Thoughtseize and Grief to take a look at the opponent's hand. And Grief we can also maybe get back with Moseo later, so has additional synergy. We already mentioned the Accursed Marauder and Plague Crafter, which are perfect creatures to make the opponent sacrifice something and later get them back. Then we also have some board wipes in the form of Toxic Deluge, Damnation, and the Meathook Massacre, which also doubles up as another Blood Artist-like effect. And then we've got some other heavy hitters, such as Invoke Despair, can also be an answer to enchantments, which is pretty rare in black, while maybe drawing us some extra cards. Virtue of Persistence can use a 2-mana adventure to take out a creature and gain some life, and then later the enchantment can also help reanimate more creatures. And the March of Wretched Sorrow can also pitch black cards from our hand to help cast it, dealing damage and gaining that much life, so it can also help enable Moseo for us. Then we move on to our card advantage, where we've got some cheap instants, Corrupted Conviction, similar to Village Rites, similar to Deadly Dispute, which also makes a treasure. And then the Nightmare is a powerful enchantment that can help sacrifice our creatures to get some back out of our graveyard, and as long as their mana values are relatively small, we can sort of keep looping this while maybe enabling some of our sacrifice synergies. Then we've got Knight's Whisper, a bit of a remnant from when I used to have the Jet Medallion in the deck. Could also replace it with Sign in Blood, pretty similar. Sometimes Sign in Blood can target the opponent directly, but Whisper is a little easier to cast if you have some of your colorless lands in play. Then there's the Ripples of Undeath as another way to fill the graveyard, but we can also exchange life total for one of those extra cards that we mill each turn. The Opportunist rewards us for both sacrificing our own creatures as well as destroying the opponent's, so it can also draw multiple cards in a turn cycle. Phyrexian Arena to draw a card at the cost of 1 life each turn. Necro can immediately exchange a lot of life total for a lot of extra cards. We mentioned the Dread Presence rewarding us for playing Swamps, as we get to deal 2 damage and gain 2 life, or just draw a card at the cost of 1 life. Yawgmoth can also help sacrifice our creatures at the cost of a life to put a -1 counter on a creature and draw a card. We've got the new Decorum with Paradigm, so if we cast it once, we'll keep casting it turn after turn. Can also target the opponents as kind of a Sign in Blood to get the game over with, but usually we'll want the extra cards ourselves. The Witch of the Moors is another payoff for gaining life, as it'll force the opponent to sacrifice a creature while returning a creature from the graveyard back to our hand. It's another very nice one. And then of course Bolas' Citadel, also great if we can get it down at a healthy life total, and then we can start exchanging our life for extra cards off the top of the deck. And then moving on to our life gain effects, we've got the classic Blood Artist, which also triggers off opposing creatures dying, whereas a Blood Witch and Cutthroat only look at our own. Same with the Botanist, which is a bigger version, draining for 2, assuming the creatures that died had power or toughness 1 or less. And then we've got Aetherborn, 2/3 Death Touch lifelink, also annoying for the opponent to block if we control Moseo, because if it trades, we'll just get it right back. Same with our other Death Touch creatures, Barrogoyf, which if it connects can mill a bunch of cards and get a creature back out of the graveyard. And then we've got the Revenant as a flying Death Touch lifelinker, an upgraded version compared to Vampire Nighthawk, can also renew it out of the graveyard, which is also a nice way of enabling Moseo. And then a Sephiroth, another way to sacrifice our creatures while draining the opponent, can also maybe transform it into the One-Winged Angel. And then Ayara can drain the opponent whenever a black creature enters, so can trigger twice of Moseo, helps enable Moseo as well since we can sacrifice other creatures to draw cards. Then there's Sheoldred, punishing the opponent for drawing cards, draining them for 2, while rewarding us for doing the same, so can help offset some of our card draw engines that cost us life. And then the Grey Merchant can be a nice finisher once we build up our devotion to black, and we do have some permanents like Ayara, Bolas' Citadel, and Necro that have 3 black devotion, so that can add up pretty quickly. And then we get to our sacrifice fodder, where the Freebooter and the Shambling Ghast can maybe leave behind a treasure token when they die, whereas Infestation Sage, Nested Shambler, and the Linkbreaker can leave behind a 1/1 token. Then we also have the Stitcher Supplier, milling 3 when it enters or dies to help fill the graveyard. Mire Triton gains 2 when it enters, also very nice with Moseo, and then we'll mill 2. And then the 3 mana reinforcements will mill 3 and gain 3, so it keeps getting bigger. And then the Bitterbloom Bear can make an extra fairy token each turn, which we can also maybe use to sacrifice to our various effects. And then last but not least, we already mentioned Entomb, Reanimate, and Vampiric Tutor, which is a nice little combo package. And then the mana base features plenty of basic swamps, Phyrexian Tower, one of the more important lands in this deck, allowing us to sacrifice a creature for an extra mana. The castle can maybe help draw if we're missing a different card draw engine. Then we've got the 2 life gain lands, Adventures Inn and Radiant Fountain, gaining 2 when they enter. And Nykthos can also reward us for having lots of devotion, making additional mana for us. And then I mentioned the Library of Alexandria, awesome if you have it in your opening hand especially. And then Urborg can turn some of those non-swamps back into swamps to help enable some of those other synergies. So yeah, that's our deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Y'shtola, an Esper control deck. So Grief is good, Hex and Dismember a little bit less so. I guess we can pitch the Hex, keep Dismember to answer Y'shtola. So I'll give it a try. And then Ripples can help find a third land if we don't draw one. So we can Grief at any time, so I can wait another turn. There's no 2-drop I absolutely have to take. So can maybe now check for interaction. Pitching the Hex, since I don't expect them to have many cheap creatures. Okay, opponent's got blue mana. Unmaking can answer any of our permanents. And then Worm Power Stone for ramp into Immortal Sun. Dark Petition, shortcut to draw 2. So the Unmaking and the Power Stone are the scariest cards at the moment. We do have both Ripples and Phyrexian Arena as powerful enchantments. So maybe I try to limit their mana so they can't go crazy with Immortal Sun. And then accept that they can Anguished Unmaking the Ripples here. Because if I go for Cutthroat, I don't think they feel inclined to remove it. They can just draw 2 with a shortcut. So that happens, and now we resolve. Well, Barrogoyf is also an option. Yeah, I guess that lines up a little bit better. Now a 4/5 thanks to the fetch land. And yeah, that means Moseo can get back the Grief if we'd like. Especially if I draw a land, I could still dismember Y'shtola. Alright, so may as well take the decision out of their hands. Play Moseo. Get back Grief. Yeah, this is a blowout. A milling 4. Did not mill any creatures, but that's okay. And then I guess Dark Petition is probably the scariest now, since that could get some sort of board wipe. Even if they can't cast it right away. Just them having it in hand could be problematic. Opponent's down to 13. And does have double blue up for potential counter spells. So could start with Cutthroat, could see what the Barrogoyf brings to the table first. As our opponent falls to 3. And how about a Shieldred? So if Shieldred does get countered, I guess Mana Drain's no longer in the format, would have to be Counterspell. I mean, could also just go Phyrexian Arena plus Cutthroat to be fair. I'll leave Shieldred as a nice leftover. Although I suppose if they did counter Shieldred, Moseo would have gotten it right back. Opponent did have a board wipe. Expertise into stock up, but now that means our opponent just dies to the Cutthroat triggers as well. Sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Terra, Herald of Hope, so a Mardu graveyard deck. My hand is keepable. Virtue answers their commander. Got some other removal. And not sure yet what I want to get with Vampiric Tutor, but I should probably make up my mind soon. And they've got a Signet. Yeah, I can wait on Tutor, maybe get a Sweeper later if the board calls for it. For now we've got an Edict at the ready. Voice of Victory, alright, that stops me from casting the Edict. So, what would I want to tutor for, if anything? Do we have any effective Graveyard Hate, perhaps? Not that I can really think of. Checking my options, Dark Ritual's always tempting. Although I don't have anything amazing to ramp into at the moment. A library could be interesting, but I won't have 7 cards in hand to enable it. So, yeah, close call. Maybe I just get a Phyrexian Arena here and call it a day, since our hand lacks a bit of card draw. Opponent also had a Priest of Fell Rites. So, yeah, I mean, I can try to answer their board. I think we just play the arena and then maybe try to draw a board wipe at some point, which our opponent doesn't know whether or not we got it. So there's Terra. At least now between Virtue and Edict we can spend 4 mana answering 2 creatures, which is a bit more efficient. And a Selfless Spirit, so helps against a card like Damnation, does not help against Meathook Massacre or Toxic Deluge. So those are the cards we would want. Also doesn't help against the Virtue. So I guess we'll start with an Edict and then Virtue Terra. Although they can also use the Priest to get things back. And gets rid of the voice. I don't have any creatures in my graveyard. They did send Terra back to the command zone, since they can just replay it for 5. And now Loran could be painful if they get it back to answer the arena. And they could get it back right now with the Priest. Alright, that's a setback. So don't have a whole lot going on. Can play Moseo, keep up Village Rights. But yeah, we need a bit of a reset button. Elementalists can get back the Swords to Plowshares, at the very least. And we can write some response. Find Ayara. But yeah, Terra's gonna get to bring something back. And this is a pretty tough board state to clear up now. So yeah, maybe should have waited a little bit longer on the Vampiric Tutor. So, can go Ayara into Arnon. Don't necessarily want the Elementalist to die, since then Terra can get it back. Same goes for Loran. Opponent did decide to let both players draw. Nightmare's potentially useful. So just the flyers getting in. And fear of missing out. Gets to draw for free since they were empty-handed. And then there's still a priest that can be unearthed. A Revenant the draw. So 7 mana. If I play Moseo, it will be enabling itself in a way with Ayara. So yeah, I guess we start there. Can first attack with the pests and then sack it to Ayara. Just to gain 1 extra life. We know what their priorities are. That's a land. So if I go for Nightmare, I can sack Ayara, but there's nothing to get back with it. So Nightmare can't sack anything since there's no creature in the graveyard. So then Moseo also doesn't do anything. Otherwise it could have been nice to just sack Ayara, get it back. So maybe there was a reason to attack with the Botanist. But yeah, we'll see here. Terra mills the Accursed Marauder as well. So, could trump Terra if we don't want him to get anything back. Which seems reasonable. I still get to trigger the Botanist here. And I could also let Moseo go to the graveyard to then get it back with a Nightmare. So we are clawing our way back. Alright, Summon Knights of Round, very synergistic with Terra, since it still is a valid creature to be returned. So I need to somehow burn my opponent out here, which is going to be tough. So I probably need to start by drawing. And then Nightmare back Moseo. Bolas' Citadel and Marauder. Those are some draws. So Marauder does also trigger the Botanist. Nightmare can only be activated as a sorcery. So I kind of have to do the math here to see if we can present lethal or if I should risk it with Citadel. So Moseo returning is 2 more life drain from Ayara. I can sack a creature with Ayara, 1 with Nightmare, 1 with Marauder. That's another 6. Marauder entering is 1 more. So we're getting very close to lethal. I think we try it. So Marauder can sack itself. Opponent sacks Elementalist. Then I can play the Revenant. Sack the Pests to get back Moseo. And then Ayara hasn't triggered yet. Moseo gets back Marauder, which drains for a bunch more. So that returns. Sack Marauder, drain for 2, and sack to Ayara, drain for another 2. So yeah, unless they top deck something amazing, we might have gotten there, despite it looking pretty desperate a while ago. I braid Ayara, in response can sack it. And that'll give us another trigger for what it's worth. Fatal Push can also target my own creatures to trigger the Botanist. And I can sack Moseo. Sweet. And there we have it. Awesome. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Rofellos, so we're gonna need to find cheap removal. So I'll take a mulligan. Okay, Vampiric Tutor can find an answer. So I'm trying to think what I can get with Vampiric Tutor. I could get a Grief and then sack it to Culling to make 4 mana. But I'll still be lacking an answer to Rofellos here. So then, I guess the most straightforward play is to get something like the Accursed Marauder once again, which will give me more ways to answer it later if I can get it back. Yeah, if we were on the play, then Phyrexian Tower and Culling the Weak work their way into the equation. Stomper is next. Can also soak up 1 Marauder. So Barrogoyf is already quite sizable, although Revenant is going to be the more reliable way of hitting the opponents. So yeah, close call between the two. I think I'll go Revenant. So they can replay Rofellos, and then, yeah, technically don't have an answer, now we do. So Revenant attacks. And then I'll want to, let's see, play Massacre for 1 would suffice. So then I guess there's no reason to do anything else. Unless I just want to get Moseo in circulation using Culling the Weak on Revenant. And then I can get back the Marauder instead of the Revenant. Yeah, maybe that's worth it. Play Moseo. And then end of turn. Honestly, could just get back the Revenant here. The only problem potentially being that they can play Rofellos for a 3rd time, and with a Stomper in play, Marauder is no longer an answer, so then I kind of need to get rid of the Stomper first. So then next turn, if they do replay Rofellos, I can attack with the Pest and Moseo after renewing the Revenant. So that's also enough to get back the Marauder. But by now they might have different big plays they can make. Could also use Phyrexian Tower to sack a creature, but that would make them lose a life. It's only when their creatures die that I gain. So opponent going for an Explorer, so we're not going to see Rofellos unless maybe a Castle Garenbrig's involved. Cultivator. So they're out of lands in hand. And yeah, Cultivator can maybe soak up Marauder once again. So what are we thinking? Can sack the Pest to Phyrexian Tower in order to both renew and play Barrogoyf. That seems fine. So now Moseo can individually get back the Marauder each turn. Yeah, this Marauder's been putting in work. But our opponent gets to untap with 7+ mana. We know they have all spells, so it's going to be an Awaken the Woods for 5. That's one way of stopping Barrogoyf, although it does not stop Marauder from hitting their commander, since these are tokens, and Marauder specifically says non-token. So still happy to trade Barrowgoy for a bunch of their tokens, since we'll just get it back. And now I get to mill, so that also works. Ooh, how about getting back a Shieldred? So I can cast Shieldred, or I can just get it back for free end of turn. Nah, I think we still go for Shieldred. And then play Shieldred, play Ripples, get back Marauder. Just sacking itself to trigger Meathook Massacre, even though our opponent doesn't lose anything. Alright, let's see for that to a Craterhoof Behemoth. I imagine that's lethal here, with 6 creatures all getting +6/+6. I guess currently they would have to tap one Forest Dryad, so then it's still 5 attackers getting +6/+6. Craterhoof starts out as an 11/11. So I guess 4 times 7, 28, plus 11, 39. So they might have actually had the Craterhoof, and they did the math and concluded that indeed we could have survived. And that would have left them maybe dead on the way back. Their opponent taking a different approach. Now Titan of Industry can also gain life or blow up the Ripples. Goes for a Rhino. So if they almost had lethal last turn with Craterhoof, next turn they certainly have lethal. So I need to come up with some answer. I guess I'll pay life for Knight's Whisper. See if we can maybe draw into a sweeper. Ooh, Grief was huge. So now we can maybe Grief a Craterhoof. Let's see, if I attack, how does our opponent respond? I mean, Moseo only gets blocked by the Titan. That seems like a good trade. Currently, we would be getting back a Marauder. And then Barrowgoyf can maybe trade as well. If they trade for both Barrowgoyf and Moseo, then of course I'm not getting anything back, but I think that's acceptable. So just jumping the Barrowgoyf. And then I could even double Grief my opponent with Moseo. Pitching the Triton. And then if I go full control, I can sack the Grief to the Corrupted Conviction with the trigger on the stack. And do we see a Craterhoof? We do not, but they did have a Genesis Wave and an Ulamog. So those are both pretty scary, but in fact we can just take both, since Grief returns end of turn with Moseo. And yeah, there we go. Even had some nice leftovers. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Anzrag, the Quake-Mole. So Virtue is not quite enough to answer it, maybe in combination with Yawgmoth, although I'm missing some cheap sack fodder for Deadly Dispute, so I think that's a few too many strikes against it. Okay, this could work. Can potentially enable Revolt on Fatal Push with Yawgmoth to take out their commander. Opponent's got the birds, also worthy candidate to be fair, since it's going to be a while before I can take it out with Yawgmoth. And I could reanimate the opponent's birds. Is that better than Cutthroat here? Would help me play Yawgmoth next turn. I don't hate it. Yeah, let's go for it. The birds has switched sides. And then the Cutthroat can be a way of gaining life to enable Moseo. And Swiftfoot Boots, okay. Toxic Deluge and answer at sorcery speed. So yeah, I think Yawgmoth is the play unless we want to run out Moseo. Next turn it can gain life with a pest. But yeah, there's nothing in the graveyard to get back. So Yawgmoth it is. Opponent with a World Weave. Pretty decent. Castle the draw. So this turn we can double spell Moseo and Cutthroat. Could also go Opportunist and Cutthroat. Problem with Moseo is that I won't be gaining enough life to get anything significant back. Unless I sack both the birds and the Cutthroat, I can get back the Cutthroat, I guess. Is that worth it? I think I would rather leave the option available. Get in for 2. And just pass a turn. So if they go for Anzrag, they won't have the mana to equip it. Opponent's got an Ice Still with a fetch land, so yeah, that's a nice combination. So they get to go off, play a bunch of lanes. Better for me to wait to do the sacrificing in my turn, so at least Moseo triggers and we can get something back. Now of course they can also equip the Ice Still with the boots. So do I want to respond to that? Not really. Take my turn. Now Deluge could still be an answer, and could have been a reason to put 1 counter on it, so Deluge for 3 still kept Yawgmoth alive. But yeah, let's start by attacking. Cutthroat can also get in. And I will play the Opportunist first, so we can maybe draw an extra card. So damage happens. So then we'll use Yawgmoth. Submit 0, sack Cutthroat. I'll have gained 2 life while drawing off Opportunist. And now Blood Artists and Signets, okay. So we can go Signet into Artists, and then with their opponent at 14, I'm not too far from just winning by sacking a whole bunch of creatures. Since every creature on my side I sacrifice represents 2 damage. Can let our opponent go off a bit. Uprising is fine. And Anzrag. So if they move the boots onto Anzrag, we can maybe respond, but yeah, I don't really need to do anything else here. Halfling is fine. They can have all the lands they want. Take my turn. Fountain gains more life, but I really just need to get a couple points in. Opponent takes it. Alright, so I guess we'll start sacking. And draw off Opportunists. Find a Grief and a Dismember. So options are plenty here. Opponent falls to 7, find a Monument. Can play that into Grief. Could also evoke the Grief, although I can just sacrifice it once it's in play. Heroic Intervention, and the opponent knows that they're dead here, just keep sacking stuff. End of turn, Moseo could also maybe get something back, but our opponent's just very dead here. Sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Tyvar, a Jubilant Brawler, somehow opened without any black mana, but the Signet can fix, and then Library can draw, so sign me up. Having two colorless lands does make the Invoke Despair a little awkward, but I'm sure we'll survive. Alright, Duress is going to make my library less effective now, since I wouldn't be able to draw up to 7. So that's a setback. We'll see what they take, the Signet or only Black Source. So then now I think I actually don't play my land, so I can go on the library plan again. It's not like I'm playing towards anything. Entomb, okay. We'll see if they have a reanimate to go with it, or if they're just setting up Tyvar. A Bloodghast, so they can get that back for free. Fair enough. And then a forest into maybe a mana elf. Alright, so I finally get to library. And hit my land drop, which is a Nykthos, yet another land that doesn't produce black. Eventually I guess it could, once we build up our devotion. So definitely a strange start. There might be one colorless land left in the deck. That gains 2 life. Opponent can get back a Cursed Marauder, but decides not to. Alright, well, it's library again. Gotta make sure to play a land first, actually. Well, I mean, there's nothing else I can do. And then I guess I can wait to activate the library. Yeah, this Invoke Despair is looking pretty awkward. And now Jet Collector. Take 3. At least our opponent's not doing much either. Tyvar can still untap. And end of turn draw. Can we draw Swamp? We can. Alright, so now I can play the Terminus. And draw with Library, and then still cast a 2-drop. And I guess the Shieldred's Edict is looking good. Just make them sacrifice Tyvar. They know about Damnation, so that's maybe why they're not overextending. Tyvar's back. And we see a Craterhoof Behemoth in the graveyard, along with a Reanimate, so at least they wouldn't be able to top deck it. Bolas's Citadel, more card draw. I could cast it, would mean also tapping the library. Yeah, Damnation feels a bit weak here. What's the alternative? Just draw with library. And then maybe start upping my devotion a little bit. So I've got 5 mana left, can go Moseo plus Cutthroat. Moseo can pressure Tyvar. Could also go Infestation Sage into Requiting Hex. Cast it with Blight, taking out the Halfling. And then sack the Sage and get it back. That also feels decent. I'll admit I haven't read Jet Collector all the way through, so it's possible it's more important. Yeah, seems fine. So opponent maybe has their own board wipe. So then I don't really want to block with the Infestation Sage, because at least I can get a token out of it. A Molt Tender is next. Mills Fell the Profane. And they could do it again. Opponent's going to pass with a bunch of mana up, so maybe planning to remove Moseo here. Alright, so maybe start with an attack, see what happens. And then I'm maybe down to play the Citadel. Tyvar down. So I think I just play Citadel without playing a land first, so I can still play a land off the top. Yawgmoth is pretty good. Nice Whisper for more cards. Play a land. And reanimate. Well, could have reanimated the opponent's Craterhoof. But let's see. Is there anything else worthwhile? Not really. So I can just draw it and maybe keep going. Moltender does now have Summoning Sickness again. Yeah, just another land on top. In that case, I'll just pass. Discard 2 lanes. And now Nykthos looks pretty exciting too. Ooh, Shifting Woodland, have to be careful with cards like Craterhoof. But of course it's not going to trigger its ETB effect. So it would just be a 5/5. Opponent's looking through the graveyard. Ooh, Dark Ritual, okay. Replay Tyvar. -2. And Marauder. So I cannot sacrifice a token to this ability. So we can get rid of Moseo. And then, do I leave it in the graveyard for reanimate is a question. I don't think so. Take my turn. Mire Triton on top. Do have to be mindful of our life total. But yeah, I'll play the Triton before we use Nykthos. And Nightmare. Probably worth a 2 life. And our opponent scoops it up. Alright, fair enough. Definitely gonna have an exciting turn here, getting to play the Deathbloom Botanist. Cutthroat, can sack a bunch of creatures to Yawgmoth, gain more life, draw more cards. And then at some point Nykthos can also tap for 8 or 9 mana. So this was gonna be probably game over at some point, maybe even reanimating the opponent's Craterhoof in the process. Sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Iroh, Dragon of the West. So an aggressive firebending deck. Okay, so what do we think of our hands? It's a bit painful with Necro and Decorum. But yeah, I guess we'll give it a try. With the Phyrexian Tower and some cheap creature we don't mind sacrificing, we can get to 5 mana a little bit sooner. Wayfarer's Bauble, a way for the opponent to set up a turn 3 Iroh. Although, yeah, the Triton lines up pretty well as a blocker. And milled a Shambler, which we can also maybe get back. And Kraza, 2-1 with a Riot. No countering allowed, and the Fire Sages with Firebending 1. Okay, so they're potentially setting up a big attack. This turn, I think we just go for Moseo. Try to line up some blocks. Opponent's attacking. So for 3 mana, they can put a +1 counter on here. Yeah, I mean, we can put Moseo in front of Kraza. and be fine with that trade. Hang on to the Triton. Don't think we need Moseo, since I'm not gaining life anytime soon. I guess we do have the Pest, which can help get back the Shambler, so that would be a reason to hang on to Moseo. Still gonna send it back to the command zone, even though the Nightmare is also a way to access it. And now demand answers using the Firebending mana. And Abeyo is next. Okay. So this turn could go for Ayara. And then Phyrexian Tower to play Blood Artist, sacking the Pest. Seems decent. Establish a bit of a life gain engine. Still gonna keep Triton back to hold off Iroh. And now ENT as well. Yeah, I could be convinced to trade off the Triton now, since we can get it back pretty easily. And Blood Artist triggers. And now Abeyo can save up that Firebended mana for future turns. And a Geyser for 2 answers Blood Artist. Okay. Get to untap. So, could still replay Moseo, and then we'll have gained 2, so that's enough to get back the Mire Triton. Doesn't have to be super complicated all the time. And this can draw cards at instant speed, so we'll keep that available. And I think I prefer Triton over Blood Artist for now. So we're still at a very healthy life total, and yeah, we still have some card draw in hand. ENT attacks. Opponent's down to 1 card in hand, but they're gonna keep it, so it's gonna be a good one. Block here. And then the Nightmare can maybe sack the Pest to get creatures back. Ooh, a Savage Beating. So creatures gain double strike. They did not entwine it at least, so in that case I'll just sack the Triton. And Adventures In, also very nice with Moseo. Okay, so we've got options aplenty, and our opponent's gonna scoop it up. They're already too far behind. Sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Rofellos once again. This hand does not qualify. This could work, especially if they don't have any 1-mana elves. And Reanimate can also get the Marauder back. It's a Utopia Sprawl. So then we'll start with Cutthroat. If they for some reason don't play Rofellos, we can just play Moseo. And yep, opponent had a Formidable Speaker, so that can now soak up the Marauder. And they got a Cityscape Leveler in the graveyard, so that can later be unearthed. Still deciding what they're searching up with the Speaker. And it's a Kona, the nerfed version, now costing 5. Okay, now Marauder's interesting if we pair it with Conviction as well. I guess I can still go for Moseo first, and then next turn, if I gain 2 life with all our sacrifice, we can potentially set up the Marauder twice as well. Or even 3 times between the Reanimates and Moseo's trigger. Okay, scene of the crime, a way to tap down Kona. So they can immediately set up the survival ability. So yeah, that's a bit concerning. Don't have any instant speed removal at the moment. So maybe that's what we'll be looking for. So this turn, I guess we start with Marauder. They likely sack the Speaker. I get to attack with a Pest to get an extra life. Cutthroat can also get busy, because if they trade for Cutthroat, we just get that back instead. And then Marauder returns. Still have Deadly Dispute available. I guess what I could do is reanimate the opponent's Speaker and then get a Grief to take away Kona. Don't actually hate that plan. So get your Speaker. And then I'm gonna have to discard Conviction, pitch Deadly Dispute. But that is a solution to the Kona problem. Alternatively, I could have kept the Conviction to sack the Grief while it's in play temporarily. Blossoming Defense doesn't matter, because we're making them sacrifice a creature. And it's Kona I'm worried about. Although their hand is not too threatening. And get back Marauder. Still gonna sack Marauder over Speaker. And our opponent scoops it up. Awesome. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Dack Fayden, so a blue-red control deck trying to steal our artifacts. Luckily don't have too many of them. This hand's decent, so we've got both Supplier and Triton to fuel our graveyard to set up the Nightmare. So that's a nice little engine. And Sephiroth, now also something we could try to get back. So how do I feel about Nightmare, sack Supplier, get back Sephiroth? Don't hate it. Or I can just play the Mire Triton. Could also play Nightmare and not use it yet. I think I want to get a Sephiroth. And then we get to mill 3 more. And then next turn Moseo, Sephiroth can attack, sacking the Pests, which gains 1 life to get back the Stitcher Supplier once again. Opponent is on Library now, so they could just sit back and draw some cards. They could draw in my turn as well, so maybe they were digging for a Lightning Bolt, or they already have one. Now they'll have to discard to hand size. So yeah, Library can be activated at any time, so they were maybe better off activating it in my turn. So, yeah, I think we stick to the plan. Hope they don't have a wash away. Alright, opponent scoops it up, so Moseo make a Pest, Sephiroth sack the Pest, get back Supplier. They know about the Nightmare, so yeah, this is pretty tough for especially a blue-red control deck to deal with, since they don't tend to have lots of answers to graveyards or enchantments. Sweet, on to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw, facing the Reaper, King No More, so a Junt kind of mid-range deck with some -1 counter synergy. Does line up quite well against our commander at 1 toughness, when they can steal it. So this is going to be an annoying matchup. What do we think of our hands? Not particularly exciting. Okay, I'll try this. At least between Phyrexian Tower and Village Rites, we can sacrifice our 1 toughness creatures in response to the Reaper King taking them out. So turn 2 can either flash in a bearer or play a terminus. Scrounger resolves. Okay, I think I go for terminus first. Still have March available, technically. And our opponent will blight. Take 2. And Light of the Stage is enabled, exiling Liliana and Swamp. They've already played a land, they could still play a Liliana. It's going to be a Formidable Speaker instead. So I wonder what creature they're searching for. Discards a Festering Mummy. So they're definitely committed to the -1 counter theme. And gets the Obelisk Spider. So they could also be trying to set up some infinite combo with this, and Hapatra comes to mind. So I think this turn could go for Moseo, hoping they basically waste the Reaper and I get to Village Rites in response. Seems reasonable. Uses up all my mana. Could have also played Moseo with Phyrexian Tower, but then our opponent knows we can sack it in response, so it looks a lot more suspicious. So yeah, we kind of want them to play the Reaper. Okay, Snuff Out cannot hit their commander, but it can hit the remaining creatures. And a Bile Vile Boggart is next, so similar to the Mummy. Take 3. A Sweeper would do nicely. So the Liliana will go to waste. Bolas' Citadel is a good one too. So we can play that next turn. So then, for now, don't feel super compelled to replay Moseo, but it is an option. Although this time I won't have a sacrifice effect available. So let's just pass it back. Can maybe march something. Opponent putting a -1 counter on the Reaper, giving them more treasure. And a big attack. Yeah, I mean, I'm not super compelled to want to take out the Reaper, because then they can easily replay it. Could take out the Scrounger, and then still flash in a Bitterbloom Bear. Could do it for 2, could do it for 1. So I still keep Phyrexian Tower up, in case they can put -1 counters on the Bitterbloom Bear. And then make sure to keep up Phyrexian Tower. And then play this end of turn. And then I could also use Phyrexian Tower to cast a Citadel, so I can still play a land off the top, which I kind of like. And now Grief can have a look. They've got Scamp and Spider. I'll take the Spider, which they tutored for. Play a land, and the Necro. Necro plus Citadel is a little painful, I'll admit. So we do have to be a bit careful here, but yeah, let's see what we can find Adventures in is next. Draw it with a Necro. And then keep going, I guess. Barrogoyf will put me to 3. So can't play the Revenant or we're dead. And of course the Bitterbloom Bear is also going to cost me 1 life. Although I can also eventually sack it to Phyrexian Tower. Adventures in, good for 2 life. Alright, so if I block the Reaper with, let's say, Barrogoyf, what happens? Then I gain 3. They can replay the Reaper and essentially steal my Barrogoyf. Whereas if I block the Boggarts, they can take out the Bitterbloom Bear to steal it, but I'm okay with that. And I do want to gain my 3 life here if I can. So then I could also just jump with a Bitterbloom Bear on the Reaper to avoid taking 2. So -1 counter on Grief. Scamp is next. And our opponent scoops it up, alright. So next turn I would probably use Necro just to keep casting more spells off the top, but at the very least I can play the Adventures in, which gains me 2. The Barrogoyf attacking gains me more life, so then Moseo is also primed to maybe get some creatures back out of the graveyard. And then Phyrexian Tower could also sacrifice some of our creatures if we want to get them in the graveyard in the first place. Just have to be careful here with the Reaper that they don't steal the creatures that have -1 counters on them. So we got to see this mono-black Moseo life gain and drain sacrifice deck in action. And yeah, the commander is quite powerful if you can set it up correctly with the right amount of sacrifice synergies and life gain effects. The recursion from the graveyard is quite powerful, and that leaves room for plenty of interaction and some powerful card draw spells like Bolas' Citadel, which is one of my favorites. So yeah, if you enjoy this mono-black kind of control-y, life-gainy playstyle, Moseo might be up your alley. So that's going to do it for today's gameplay. Want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.